This is Tim O'Brien from Seattle on October 29th, 2025. First, we're going to cover the news. So Chrome is going to start warning users about unencrypted HTTP by default, and that's going to happen in October 2026. So you have a year to get ready for that. Experiments are showing that median user sees about one warning a week, which means that most of the web has already been moved over to HTTPS. 95th percentile sees less than 3 a week. So this closes a long-standing man-in-the-middle window on initial HTTP navigations, and it nudges the laggards towards HTTPS. And when I say laggards, I mean it. More than a decade ago, I was personally responsible for moving a large website that you've likely used over to HTTPS only. And that was driven by SEO. Google had already stated back in, I think, 2016 or 2017 that there would be a penalty to sites that were not on HTTPS. So if there's a site that's on HTTP only, I struggle to think of it, but they're going to have to move over to HTTPS in about a year. So it looks like we're finally starting to take the last few steps to make HTTP go away, and I think that's a good thing. Today's programming news is about a project that I hadn't heard of yet. It's called Apache 40. There's a Rust version of this cross-language serialization framework, and it has compile time, code gen, and zero copy. It supports circular references, trait objects. If you're looking to serialize an object or a structure of data and move it between languages, Apache 40 appears to be the thing you want to use. It's got a 70x performance improvement while maintaining simplicity and ease of use. And if you look at some of their tests, it's got higher performance improvements than that, but it depends on how you use it. Now, for those of you who are programmers, you know what I'm talking about. If you're trying to serialize objects and move them between languages, I would take a look at Apache 40. It's F-O-R-Y. It used to be named Apache Fury, but it had to be renamed for intellectual property reasons. And it's really interesting. They have like zero copy operations. It's direct memory access without intermediate buffer copies. It's interesting. I would take a look at it. Look at the show notes for links. And in today's Weird Bucket, Samsung is making ads available on a $3,400 smart fridge. So ads are going to arrive via a software update for the 2024 Family Hub refrigerators, which have a suggested retail price of between $1,900 and $3,500, and they're going to be shown on the idle cover screens. So my reaction to this might surprise you. I think a lot of people online were calling it absurdist, or this is peak 2025. Listen, you're walking around with a phone in your pocket right now that's designed to sell you ads. We're very comfortable with advertisements. I have a screen in my Jeep. I think it might have tried to sell me a couple things. I turned that feature off, and that's the key, is that owners are going to be able to opt out of this. This is not something that's going to be on by default. It's not going to be mandatory. But it's just interesting. Advertisement has changed our entire society and the way that we target ads, the way that we collect information for them. I'm not going to judge it as good or bad. I'm just going to call it today's Weird Bucket story. If you're interested in learning more about getting a refrigerator that'll try to sell you things, click on the show notes and you'll see the links there. I think it's definitely different. Today I'm going to be talking about a piece that I wrote about a month ago, and the title was 53 Years Later, the Humble Programmer Still Explains Our Existential Panic. That is not a real great title. Again, my titles are usually fairly dire. But what this was about a speech that Dijkstra gave in 1972. And now, Edsger Dijkstra, for those who don't know, was one of those computer science giants that basically invented half of the algorithms we still use today. He gave this lecture 53 years ago to the Association for Computing Machinery when they were giving him the Turing Award. And the Turing Award is a big deal. Now, here's the kicker. When you read it today, you'd swear that he was writing about AI code generation in 2025, about the anxieties that we're all feeling right now. The parts about Algol versus Fortran, those feel a little dated, for sure. But I have to say that as an Emacs user myself, when he gets excited about Lisp, I'm right there. When Dijkstra turns to the actual profession of programming, the economics of it, the humility it requires, the challenges that were looming then and are still looming now, it's like he had a crystal ball. One of the things that stuck out to me was in 1972, people thought programmers were basically overpaid clerks. And I'd make the argument that some of the people running the companies that people work for today have the same opinion. We're really just overpaid clerks in comparison to some of the large language models that could replace us. They thought that we were hired to debug and optimize, clean up after the real thinkers had done their work. Dijkstra pushed back on this hard. His point was that programming itself is the thing. It's not the incidental work around programming, it's the actual act of breaking down complex problems and expressing them in code. And then he drops this quote, which I've been thinking about for about a month. Programming will remain very difficult, because once we've freed ourselves from the circumstantial cumbersomeness, we will find ourselves free to tackle the problems that are now well beyond our programming capacity. And think about that for a second. He's saying that as our tools get better, we don't get to relax. We'll just move on to tackle harder problems. And if that sounds familiar, that's exactly what's happening with AI right now. There's another passage in this lecture that could have been written yesterday. Dijkstra says, as a matter of fact, I think that we have learned so much that within a few years, programming can be an activity vastly different from what it has been up till now. So different that we had better prepare ourselves for the shock. At first sight, this vision of programming in perhaps already the near future may strike you as utterly fantastic. Let me therefore also add the considerations that might lead one to the conclusion that this vision could still be a very real possibility. So that was all Dijkstra. That wasn't me summarizing his quote. And that's something that you could say today. Programming in 5 years, programming in 1 year is going to be a completely different activity. That was 53 years ago. So we're all sitting here wondering if programming is about to be completely transformed. And here's somebody saying the same thing before I was born. And then there's this line that also hits home. He talks about how programmer salaries might go down and links it to the perception that programmers haven't done such a good job. He says, quote, nowadays, one often encounters the opinion that in the 60s, programming has been an overpaid profession, and that in the coming years, programmer salaries may be expected to go down. Usually this opinion is expressed in connection with the recession, but it could be a symptom of something different and quite healthy. That perhaps the programmers of the past decade have not done so good a job as they should have done. That's the end of the quote. It's 53 years later, and we're still having that conversation. Salaries swing through boom and bust cycles. People keep telling developers they're overpaid, that they haven't done such a good job. Every few years, we announce that programming is about to be something entirely different. We're still caught in this loop between optimism and dread, convinced that programming is either doomed, trivialized, or about to be reinvented. But here's what reading this piece 53 years later has led me to understand. Dijkstra wasn't trying to diminish the profession. He was trying to elevate it. When he stood up there in 1972, receiving computing's highest honor, he used that platform to push programming forward as a craft, as an intellectual discipline worthy of respect and continuous improvement. Listen to how he talks about it. He's not saying that programmers are replaceable. He's saying the opposite. He's saying that programming is so intellectually demanding, so crucial to the future, that we need to approach it with both humility and ambition. He wanted programmers to see themselves not as mere implementers, but as practitioners of a profound new discipline that could reshape human capability. Contrast that with what we're hearing today. I look at the executives running our tech companies, the very companies built on the backs of programmers, and what do I see? Giddy excitement about replacing their engineering teams, blog posts about how AI will democratize programming, which is really just corporate speak for we don't need to pay programmers anymore, earnings calls where reducing headcount through automation is pitched as innovation. Dijkstra saw transformation as an opportunity to tackle harder problems, to push the boundaries of what humans could create with computers. Today's tech leadership sees transformation as an opportunity to cut costs, to finally be free of those pesky developers who dare to have opinions about product decisions and demand decent salaries. This isn't progress. This is a fundamental misunderstanding of what programming is and why it matters. Dijkstra understood that programming isn't just typing code. It's an act of precisely modeling complex systems, of turning ambiguous human needs into working solutions. He knew that as our tools got better, our ambitions would grow to match. He was trying to prepare us for that future, to inspire us to rise to meet it. Now, today's executives, they're not really trying to inspire. They're trying more to reduce programming to a commodity, to strip away everything that makes it a craft, a calling, a discipline worth dedicating your life to. They look at developers and see expense line items, not architects of the digital world we all inhabit. And here's what really gets me. These same execs with their AI-generated code that fail in production when their democratized systems collapse under real-world complexity. They're going to come running back to the programmers to fix it. Because Dijkstra was right. Programming will remain very difficult. Not because of the typing, but because of the thinking. So I want to expand a little bit in what I wrote and give you some context. In 1972, programming was still this weird new profession. The languages they were using, Algol, Fortran, COBOL, some of those are still used today. These were cutting edge. Most programmers were working on mainframes, punch cards were still a thing, and the idea of personal computers was science fiction. By the way, in the 70s, my father programmed with punch cards, and he brought home punch cards for me to draw on. Dijkstra himself was famous for his structured programming approach. He basically invented the idea of go-to statements being harmful and that we should write code in a more organized way. He also gave us Dijkstra's algorithm for finding the shortest path in a graph, which if you've ever used Google Maps, you've benefited from his work. What's fascinating is that despite all the technological changes, we've gone from punch cards to cloud computing, from assembly language to high-level frameworks. The fundamental anxiety about programming hasn't changed. We're still worried about whether we're doing it right, whether we're worth what we get paid, whether the whole profession is about to be upended by the same technological shift. A colleague of mine read my blog post and said they expected a much more curmudgeonly response to AI code generation. They know me. But here's the thing. Dijkstra already gave us a framework for thinking about this when he talks about freeing ourselves from circumstantial cumbersomeness. In my opinion, that's exactly what AI is doing. It's removing the tedious parts of programming, the boilerplate, the syntax lookups, the routine debugging. For example, yesterday, I just went and asked Claude Sonnet, hey, can you figure out how to make me a better cloudbuild.yaml for a Google Cloud Run application? I didn't have to do that myself. It could go find all the details for me and make that configuration work. But just like Dijkstra predicted, I'm not using that freedom to kick back and relax. I didn't make that prompt and send it and then say, oh, I've got 10 minutes to go, just rest. I moved on to something else. I tackled a bigger problem. Cursor, GitHub Copilot, that's going to save programmers time so that they can move on to more challenging problems. So instead of us spending an hour debugging a null pointer exception, we're going to try to architect systems that can handle millions of users. Instead of writing CRUD operations by hand, we're going to start thinking about how distributed systems can span continents. And some other things are happening too. I was working on a logging library last week, and I wanted to build in a fairly complex feature, something I wouldn't even think about if I had to spend the time doing that boilerplate, doing those syntax lookups. I think that generative AI allows us to take programming a little bit further, beyond what we could conceive of a few years ago. But what really gets me about this whole conversation is that we keep on going through these cycles. In my time in tech, I've been doing this for a while now. I've seen multiple this changes everything moments. The web in the mid-90s, open source going mainstream in the 2000s, cloud computing, mobile, and now AI. Each time we think programming is about to become trivial or obsolete, each time it just becomes different. I remember when I was starting out, people were saying that visual programming tools would make coding obsolete. You remember Visual Basic? Then it was low-code platforms. 4GL languages had the same promise. Then it was offshore development. Don't become a programmer because that's going to go away. Now it's AI. And I wrote about this earlier. My daughter just went to college and she's majoring in computer science. And a couple of my colleagues said, that doesn't seem like a good idea. I think it is. Dijkstra saw through all of this back in 1972. Programming remains difficult because of the problems we're solving. They're going to keep on getting more challenging. So here's my prediction, and I'll stand by it. Even after programming is reinvented again, quote, programming will remain very difficult. These tools will change, the languages will evolve, AI will become our coding partner, but at the end of the day, someone still needs to understand the problem, break it down, and ensure the solution actually works. When production fails, a great answer is not going to be like, I don't know, ask the computer. We're still going to be the humble programmers that Dijkstra was talking about, aware of our own limitations, constantly learning, and always slightly anxious about what's coming next. And that's a good thing. That humility, that awareness of how much we don't know is what's going to keep us improving. But also reading Dijkstra today, he's prescient about the psychological aspects of programming. He understood that this isn't just a technical profession. It's one that's bound up with economics, perception, and constant change. He knew that programmers would always be caught between being seen as overpaid button pushers and recognized as problem solvers. And 53 years later, it hasn't changed very much. Programming will change. Our relationship with programming, our anxieties about it, the cycles of boom and bust, those are the constants. So next time you're feeling that existential dread about whether AI is going to replace you, or whether you're really adding value, or whether programming is about to change completely, remember that a Dutch computer scientist was having the same thoughts in 1972. And look at those 53 years. Programming didn't go away. So I got some comments on this post that I made. I just want to go through some of those. Keith Collier talked about me discussing Dijkstra and humility seems ironic. I'm not particularly familiar with Dijkstra's personality or how that came across, but he was famously opinionated and not always humble in person. I'll say we have other Dutch programmers that are very well known that have the same issue. I don't know. I think if I met him right now, or if I had met him, I might have the same impression, but I'm not qualified. I don't know. Gordon Robertson said, who are the equivalent teachers today? And that is a really good question. I do think we have a lot of visionary programming people walking around. Alistair Coburn is one of them. I could name 25 others. People listening to this who think of themselves as leaders are being offended. But I think we've moved to a model where we have leaders in different subgroups. So if you're in React, if you're in Rust, if you're in Go, there's people who lead in those areas. Andre Ruth left a comment about starting to work with Fortran in 1966. And he says it reinforces the point about cycles. Someone who's been programming for 60 years has seen multiple everything is about to change moments. And last note, because it's the 29th of October, and I know Amazon just had a huge layoff. If you're a developer that thinks that AI is at fault here, I'm not going to disagree, but I will say this: stay with the profession. I think the profession is going to only evolve, but it's going to depend on us taking it forward. This story that you're reading on the news about how, AI is going to replace everything. AI is absolutely going to have some impact on jobs and some impact on how people think about what they do. But fundamentally, if you're a programmer and you want to stick with this profession, I only think we're going to need more going forward. And I think you are going to have to use AI. But it's a tough time, and I just wish you well. Thank you for listening. This has been a relatively long piece, but I think it's important. I would encourage you to read the piece I wrote, but more important than that, read this speech from 1972. It seems like almost half a century ago, which is what it is, but it's still very relevant to what we do today. And then just because I mentioned Emacs in this piece, I just want to shout out Emacs is the true meaning in life. So thank you for listening, and I hope you have a good day.